War does something strange to money, not just prices going up or economies slowing down. Something deeper happens, something almost invisible at first, that quietly reshapes how an entire nation values things. And once you understand it, you will never look at money the same way again. Let us go back to World War I Germany. The war ended in 1918 and Germany had lost. The country owed billions in war reparations to the Allied powers. The German government had a problem. They did not have enough gold or real assets to pay. So they made a choice that would haunt economics textbooks forever. They started printing money. At first, it seemed like a clever solution. The presses ran day and night, producing fresh banknotes by the millions. But here is the thing about money that most people forget. Money is not valuable because it is paper. It is valuable because people trust it represents something real. By 1923, that trust had completely collapsed. A loaf of bread in Germany cost 200 billion marks. Workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before prices rose again. People used wheelbarrows to carry cash to the grocery store. Children built toys out of stacks of banknotes because the paper was cheaper than buying actual toy blocks. This was hyperinflation, and war had lit the fuse that caused it. But Germany was not alone in this experience. This same pattern appears throughout history in nearly every major conflict. When governments go to war, they need money fast. Armies need food, weapons, uniforms, and transport. All of this costs enormous amounts of money. Governments typically have three choices: raise taxes, borrow money, or print it. Raising taxes is politically painful and slow. Borrowing takes time and has limits, so printing money becomes the tempting shortcut. And that shortcut almost always leads somewhere dark. Now here is where it gets fascinating. During wartime, the relationship between money and goods completely flips. In normal times, if you have money, you can buy almost anything. During war, the opposite often becomes true. The things that matter most, food, fuel, medicine, shelter, become scarce. People with enormous amounts of cash cannot always buy what they need. Meanwhile, someone with a small farm producing potatoes suddenly has something far more valuable than any banknote. This is when barter economies quietly reappear inside modern nations. Cigarettes become currency in prisoner of war camps. Canned food gets traded like gold. Real, tangible things replace printed paper as the true measure of value. Subscribe to follow more stories like this one. The American Civil War gives us another powerful example of this. The Confederate States printed their own currency to fund the war effort. At the start of the conflict, Confederate dollars had real purchasing power, but as the Union blockade tightened and Southern resources dried up, confidence in Confederate money evaporated. By the end of the war, Confederate currency was practically worthless. Soldiers sometimes refused to accept it as payment. Merchants demanded gold or goods instead. An entire economy had quietly abandoned its own official money. The Union side had its own money troubles too. The United States government issued greenbacks, paper money not backed by gold, for the first time in American history. People were deeply suspicious of this new paper. For years after the war ended, there were fierce political battles over whether to keep greenbacks or return to gold-backed money. The psychological scar of wartime money printing ran deep in the American consciousness for decades. World War II brought a completely different but equally strange twist. This time, instead of simple inflation, governments used something called price controls and rationing. The idea was to prevent prices from rising out of control. Governments fixed the official price of goods like butter, meat, and gasoline. On the surface, this seemed to work. Prices stayed stable. But underneath, something interesting happened. Because official prices were artificially low, goods began to disappear from regular stores. People with connections or money to spend on the black market could still get what they needed. Everyone else had to survive on rations and waiting lists. Money became almost secondary to having the right ration book or knowing the right people. This is a pattern that shows up again and again. War distorts the normal rules of money in ways that economists spend years trying to understand and predict. And civilians caught in the middle are the ones who feel it most directly. There is also the curious case of war bonds. During both world wars, governments asked ordinary citizens to lend their savings to the war effort in exchange for bonds that promised future repayment with interest. In the United States, the government sold over $185 billion worth of war bonds during World War II. This was brilliant financial engineering. It gave citizens a way to feel patriotic while also reducing the amount of money circulating in the economy, which helped keep inflation lower. People willingly locked their money away and trusted the government to return it. That trust, that willingness to delay spending for a future reward, was itself a kind of economic miracle born from wartime necessity. But what happens to the money of the losing side? This is perhaps the most dramatic version of the wartime money story. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Japanese currency was already badly damaged by inflation. The occupation forces introduced new financial rules almost immediately. Old notes were frozen, withdrawals were limited, and people who had saved carefully for years found their savings suddenly trapped or devalued. The same happened in Germany after World War II. The Reichsmark, already battered, was eventually replaced entirely by the Deutschmark in 1948. Every German citizen received a fixed small amount of the new currency. Old savings, old debts, old fortunes were essentially wiped clean. It was a brutal financial reset, but it gave the economy a foundation to rebuild from. Vietnam, Korea, and more recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan show the same themes repeating with modern variations. In Iraq after 2003, old Saddam-era dinars were replaced with new currency. The exchange rate and the rollout became intensely political. In war zones, US dollars often circulate alongside or even replace local currency because people trust a stable foreign money more than their own government's promises. The dollar has become the world's unofficial wartime safe haven currency, a remarkable position for any nation's money to hold. And here is perhaps the strangest and most thought-provoking part of this whole story. War, despite destroying so much, sometimes accidentally solves economic problems that peacetime governments could never fix. The massive government spending required to fight a war can pull an economy out of deep recession. The United States in 1939 was still suffering from the Great Depression. Unemployment was high, factories were idle, and confidence was low. By 1942, with full war production underway, unemployment had nearly vanished. Factories ran around the clock. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers. The economy hummed with activity it had not seen in over a decade. The war did not just cost money. In a strange and uncomfortable way, it also created it. Watch the full video to explore more economic history that will genuinely surprise you. None of this means war is economically good. The destruction of infrastructure, the loss of human lives and labor, the displacement of entire populations, all of these carry costs that no amount of wartime production can truly offset. Economists who have studied the full long-term picture consistently find that war leaves economies worse off than they would have been without the conflict. The short-term sugar rush of wartime spending is almost always followed by years of painful adjustment, debt repayment, and rebuilding. What war does reveal, however, is something deeply true about the nature of money itself. Money is not wealth. It is a promise. It works only as long as people believe in it, trust it, and agree to use it. The moment that belief breaks down, whether from inflation, defeat, occupation, or simply fear, money loses its power almost overnight. Gold, food, land, and skill become the real currencies. People return to the oldest forms of trade, swapping real things for real things, measuring value not in printed numbers but in survival and necessity. The next time you hold a banknote in your hand, think about what it really is. It is a shared agreement, a social contract printed on paper. It works because everyone around you agrees that it works. History shows us in the clearest and most dramatic terms that this agreement is far more fragile than we assume. War tears it open and shows us what is underneath. And what is underneath is both terrifying and fascinating in equal measure.